Hello, this is Mike Knudstrup, and today I am talking about human resource management and particularly focusing on employee selection. I know there's a lot more to HRM than that, huge legal sides, issues, and hopefully if you're like my college, Florida Southern College, you get into a lot of that in business law. So I'm just talking about how selecting employees from that point of view. We'll talk about job analysis, job description, job specification, specifying the minimum qualifications that we're looking for, interviewing the different types of questions you can ask, situational versus behavioral questions, realistic job previews, using those, reliability and validity. Hopefully your selection methods are both reliable and valid. And then the different selection decisions that you can have. You can make the correct accept decision, correct reject, or you can make the incorrect reject or accept decisions. And the relative costs of those two, and maybe why managers tend to be biased towards one type of error more than the other. All right. Again, my name is Mike Knudstrup. You're probably watching this as part of my YouTube series on principles of management, and I welcome your comments in any of these videos. I'll try to respond to them as I'm able. For some reason, YouTube doesn't alert me, so I've noticed I've had comments that have went by and I haven't responded to them. I apologize in advance, but definitely I try to respond to all comments. All right. Before we hire people, we got to know what job they're going to be doing, all right? And so part of that is the first step is analyzing the job. How do we analyze a job? How do we get at the knowledge, skills, and abilities, or KSAs, of a job? What are you going to do? Two main methods would be to interview people regarding the job, maybe job incumbents, the experts, people who've done the job. We might also observe them and see how they do the job. Job analysis should lead to a job description. In fact, a fair amount of overlap there between the two, and we'll give an example here in a minute. But job description is what the job holder does, how it's done, why it's done. And then finally, the last part, as a result of our job analysis, job description, we should be able to specify what the job is. What are the minimum qualifications needed that a person must possess that's going to be in the position. So we need a job specification, and so we can advertise it, put it out there, maybe on Monster.com or Craigslist or wherever that might be. Okay, so a quick example here of job assessment. And, several people, I've got several subscribers from around the world. So we'll pick an international game here as an example, and also soccer or football, depending on where you live. Also, my daughters have played soccer extensively, and I've noticed that the process maybe of selecting referees maybe could use some work, at least based on the complaints I see. Every single game, someone's complaining about the referees. All right, so I'm not really sure that this would make the difference, but it certainly would be a good start. And how would you go about this job assessment with referees? First, you got to analyze the job. You determine what are the KSAs. You might interview referees, expert or experienced referees. You might also watch good referees and determine, what knowledge of the rules, for example, skill to move quickly with the flow of the game, ability to mediate conflict. All right, we might find as a job analysis. Then we go down to what they do, how it's done, and why it's done. All right, they know the rules. They apply them quickly. They keep up with the flow of the game. They don't get in the way of the game. Sometimes referees get in the way. They're too slow. They don't duck the ball. All right. The people on the lines. I admit I don't know all the terms here to soccer. I'm an American football player, basketball player, and baseball player myself. Sometimes the folks, a big one that I noticed, they don't keep up with the flow of the play, and they miss offsides. So they need to keep up so they get the offsides right. Ability and why they done. Another thing they might do is they diffuse conflict, or even they stop conflict from escalating or occurring, and they do that by making quick, authoritative, and correct calls. All right. From there, we come to our job specification, maybe of our hypothetical referee, the minimum qualifications. Maybe that's where things fall down in this process. We might want them to have 4 years experience at a lower level, a training certification appropriate to whatever level they're refereeing at, and then some minimum ability to run or maybe walk, like a 40-yard dash, and I don't know, 40-yard dash, and what would be appropriate here? 6 seconds, something like that. From there, you advertise the job in the most typical way, maybe not always the best way, but the most typical way people are selected, at least at the end phase, is through an interview. So what kind of questions are best in interviews? All right. Well, situational interviews. And by the way, interviews often are not very good selection devices. Paper and pencil tests are often just as valid predictors of on-the-job performance as interviewers are. Interviewers have their biases. They're fresh in the morning. They get hungry at noon. They get tired at the end of the day. Maybe they're having a good or bad day. Maybe they're biased. Oh, this person's like me, so they'll do well on the job. So careful selection of the questions you're going to use is really important to interviews. Situational interviews throw out hypothetical questions to potential employees, to interviewees. Oh, for example, you see two people in a conflict. How would you mediate it? That is a hypothetical question. And you probably get a lot of different answers. A behavioral question asks them to give accounts of actual past behavior. So tell me the last time you saw a conflict between two people. What did you do? And the real question here I'll throw out to you is, which one is going to get more truthful answers, behavioral or situational questions? If you said behavioral, you are correct. There's something about behavioral questions, asking people about their past behavior, that they tend to be more honest about. It's hard to lie about past behavior. Situational interviews, you maybe get honest answers, but people interject their best selves. Like with the conflict one, you could get a lot of different answers, but they might say, well, I stepped in, I asked both sides what was going on, I suggested some solutions, I helped calm heads prevail, and we went along with our lives. Who knows? All right, what you might get there. But they're going to interject their best self with the hypothetical question. At best. With behavioral questions, they're going to give a more honest answer. It's just hard to lie about past behavior. So I'd encourage you might have some hypothetical questions, but when you're preparing for an interview, try to ask behavioral questions, past behavior. Me as a landlord, I'll ask, instead of asking something situational, like, how will you handle paying the rent? Well, you know how that's going to be answered. I'm going to pay on time every month until I stay here, and I will take great care of your place. If I ask them, how many times in the last year have you been late on your rent? They're going to be a lot more honest. They tend to be more honest. So when prepare a same set of questions for your interviewees, and then try to ask behavioral questions too about past behavior. You'll get more honest answers. All right, realistic job preview is the idea that we give potential candidates both the positive and negative aspects of a job. Not always the case, and there may be good reasons for both sides. For example, sales jobs, interviews for sales jobs often just just give you the blue sky approach. No, you can make $100,000 a year. We have people making 100,000 plus whatever. It's a great job. Time off for your family and all that kind of stuff. And there are good and bad points. All right. Of doing this. If you give people just the positives, you're going to get a pretty good sample of people interested in the job. What would be the problem, though, of only giving positive? I would say expectations, right? People are going to get unrealistic expectations. They're going to be disappointed down the road. So with a realistic job preview, we're probably scaring people off. I know. I've done this kind of thing before. I hire people to do work for me, and I try to give both the good and the bad. Sometimes I never hear back. Maybe that's just their personality. But you give them the negative, you're going to lose people. But you should benefit from met expectations. And more satisfied people, less turnover. Okay. However you go about getting your folks, hopefully your method will be fairly reliable and valid. All right. Reliability means that you get consistent scores with your selection method. Validity means there's a relationship between the selection device and the scores and eventual performance. People get high scores, and those folks end up performing well in the job. People get low scores, they end up performing poorly. Many of you are listening to this, or probably most, are students, so you might be familiar with tests and assessments to get into college, like the SAT or the ACT. All right. There's certainly a lot of controversy about these, but if you can answer yourself, whether these are reliable and valid. If it's reliable, it means if you took the test time after time, you get more or less the same score. You should improve from test to test because you're learning about it. You may be less nervous, but in general, your scores tend to keep a fairly good range. That would mean that the test is reliable. Okay. If it's valid, what does that mean? High scores on the SAT, and you end up doing well in college, high GPA. Whereas people who get low scores end up doing poorly in college with the SAT. So that would be example of validity. If they get high scores on the SAT but low scores in college, they do poorly in college, that would indicate a low validity. There's a little diagram to indicate what's the difference between reliability and validity. And there's a little bit of an oblong, bullseye. But maybe some of you have done target practice, archery, marksmanship, or whatever. Let's say we got a marksman here who's shooting and then has a scatter plot here, pretty tight. Would this be reliable, valid? What would it be? Probably reliable, right? Because you're getting the same spot every time. Valid, no, because you're not getting in the bullseye. You got someone who's shooting right in here, you're valid, right? You've sighted in your gun or your bow well. This is an example of validity. And you also are reliable too. You can't really be valid without being reliable too. So the different selection outcomes that we can have as a result of a selection process. You can correctly accept somebody. You said yes when you should have said yes. Or you can correctly reject. You said no when you should have said no. So what do you think an accept error is? Accept error, also known as a false positive. All right, you said yes when you should have said no. A reject error is a false negative. You said no when you should have said yes in terms of the candidate. You said no and they would have been a good candidate. The false positive or accept error is you said yes, you hired that candidate, hired that person, and they didn't work out. They were a failure on the job. Which error costs more? Which error is more expensive? And this, I think, leads to biases on the part of people who hire folks. If you said the accept error is more expensive, you are exactly right. Reject errors are not very expensive. Most jobs you get dozens, maybe hundreds of applications. You look, spend a minute or two, or maybe even your computer program sorts through and rejects people left and right. You spend a minimal amount of money on reject errors. Who knows? $10, $20, whatever it is, it's negligible. Accept errors can be very expensive. Imagine you hire a manager for a job. It takes a certain amount of training and time for them to get acclimated, for you to even determine how well they're doing. And they get on the job, they make some mistakes, people quit as a result of their management, customers leave, whatever. And then result is accept errors can be very expensive. They tend to say, somewhere around a half a year's salary are the cost of accept errors. Okay, so if a manager's making $50,000 a year, $50,000 a year, an accept error, just saying yes to the wrong person, costs $25,000. All right. So accept errors being very expensive, reject errors being very cheap. What do you think the typical bias is on a hiring person? Well, they're going to be much more likely to commit reject errors than accept errors. And if you haven't had this happen to you, you almost certainly will if you apply for enough jobs. You're going to think to yourself, well, like 85% of that job I had nailed. The other 15%, that was uncertain. And they knew that, and I knew that. And therefore, for that reason, and maybe that reason only, they went with the safe candidate who they know would do it. I think I'll outperform that person by night and day. But because of that 15% uncertainty that they're going to make an accept error, they went with the safe choice. All right. I believe I've had jobs where I've applied where I thought I presented a fairly good case, that I would do a good job there. However, there was some uncertainty there. And so they went with a much safer choice. Who knows all the variables, but other people have told me the same. And, my own business, for example, I'm very careful about accept errors because I've seen the damage that a bad employee can do. And I've seen the bad damage that a bad tenant can do. It can cause a lot of headaches, cost you a lot of money and time. So I know for myself, I'm much quicker to reject than I am to accept. It's an unfortunate part of life that good people, don't get the opportunities that they would, but, you live with them, you roll with them. All right. So that's human resource management from a selection point of view. Again, comments, questions, please put them my way. Hopefully YouTube will send them to me. All right, look forward to more videos soon.